Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I know you're super excited about this because it's more graphing. So let's get started because I know you're dying to get this going. So let's turn to page 775, section 12.2, graphing rational functions. Here we go. All right, so I'm going to show you some shortcuts today. I'll show you how to graph these hyperbolas with a table of values. We did that in yesterday's section, but I'll go over it again real quick for you. But I'm going to give you a shortcut of how to know what the graph is going to do. Is it going to move somewhere? Is it going to stretch or shrink? And I'm going to give you some of those little clues here, starting with example 1 to help you kind of know a shortcut ways to do some of that, because I'm not going to make you graph everything in this section. Okay? So let's look at our example number 1. Remember, we're dealing with an equation that's y equals a over x, right? Those are the things that we were graphing in last section, okay? So remember when we were graphing other times, we had to say if our parabola was a shrink or a stretch, depending on what it did. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing here. Notice on page 775, the blue in the blue box there, the blue hyperbolas are the ones that we're comparing with, okay? So you don't have to draw those every time. The first thing is, if my A number, which is this top number, is a negative number, we're going to have a reflection, okay? So if you see a negative number here, that's going to be a reflection. You can write reflection. And then if it is a number, okay, this is how to, if I could say this, if it's the absolute value, if the absolute value is bigger than 1, okay, so absolute value of -2 is 2, that number is bigger than 1, it's going to be a stretch. If the absolute value of the number is less than 1, like between 0 and 1, then that's going to be a shrink, okay? So if you look at A, we know it's a reflection because of the -2, and because the absolute value of -2 is 2, and that's bigger than 1, then it's going to be a stretch. All right, let's look at B. B says, there's my graph, 1/3 x, because 1/3, absolute value of 1/3 is a positive, is between 0 and 1, less than 1, that's going to be a shrink. Okay, it's not a reflection this time because that's not a negative number. Okay, so we'll get to more of that in a little bit, so that's just kind of an introduction to that concept. Let's look at example number 2. Example number 2 wants you to graph 1 over x plus 3. Y equals 1 over x plus 3. Okay, so I want you to graph, so you can use a table of values to do this. If you need to find where your graph is going to be, I would, you know what, you could just start with these questions. You could just do 0, 1, 2, 3, 0, -1, -2, -3 if you want. That's kind of what they did. They found the points by plugging it into the equation, and then they just graphed them. Okay, you'll know it'll be kind of the regular one that looks like the blue one because that's what this is, but then something else is going to happen. What we're going to talk about now is what these little clues are going to mean for you right here. Okay, so actually, let's look at example 3 before we go on to this part, which is example number 4. Okay, example number 3 says to go ahead and graph y equals 1 over x minus 2. Identify the domain and range. I'm not making you do that today. Compare the graph with the graph of y equals 1 over x. So example number 3 has an equation like this, 1 over x minus 2. Okay. If you need to know where to start your graph, like where the middle of your table of values should be, okay, what you can do is you can find out which number makes this bottom part equal 0. What number could I plug in right here for this to be 0? 2 minus 2 would make a 0, right? So if I plug a 2 in here, that will be the middle of my hyperboles, okay, because that's the number they won't actually go to. So it kind of helps you know what numbers to pick. If whatever number makes this bottom equal 0, that should be the middle of your table of values, okay? And then you can go up from there. They did a 0.5 and a 1, I think, maybe, and so they did a 2.5 and a 3, maybe. I didn't look really. Yeah, you can kind of pick random things. It doesn't really matter. If you can't see where your hyperbola needs to go, you need to go ahead and do another number though, to make sure you know exactly what the curve should be, okay? So if you need to know what to put in the middle of your table of values, in this fraction, whatever makes this bottom equal 0, that's your middle. When we had the one in the previous example, it was 1 over x plus 3. What would I plug in here to make this equal a 0? I'd plug in a 0, right? So that's what the middle of my table of values should be. Okay, and then you can just go ahead and graph it. Okay? Example number 4. Okay, there are certain things in my equation that represent parts of my graph. Okay, so y equals a over x minus h plus k. Okay, so there's certain things in my equation that mean different things when it comes to my graph. All right, so let's talk about what those are. All right, so if I have a number here on the bottom with this section, this is going to move my graph left or right. Okay, and it's going to be the opposite of whatever this number is. Okay, this number here is going to move my graph up or down. Okay, but it's not opposite. So let's look at example number 4. That one is y equals 2 over x plus 1 minus 3. Okay, that looks a lot like this, right? See, this looks a lot like this. Okay, so remember, first of all, we have to see if it shrinks or stretches. Okay, we can do this. The absolute value of this number is bigger than 1. So if you want to look back on page 775, it will remind you if it's bigger than 1, then you stretch. I think it also tells us up above in that blue box. This number right here tells us we're going to move left or right, but it's opposite. So if this is a positive one, that's really moving left. That's what I mean by opposite. You would think positive one would mean to go that way, right? Well, on this bottom section here, it means the opposite thing. So this one would be going left 1 and down 3. Now, the reason I wanted us to look at that is because turn over and look at numbers 3 through 17. On your assignment today, on 3 through 17, it says graph the function, identify the domain and range, compare the graph. We're only going to do the compare part of these problems, okay? So let's look at number 4. Number 4 has a 1 over 2 with the x, right? Remember, if that's a number between 0 and 1, that's a shrink. So I would write shrink. It doesn't have any number right here or a number right here. So it didn't move anywhere else. It just did a shrink, and that's it. Okay? What about, let's pick another random one. Let's look about number 16. Okay, it's 1 over x, so it didn't shrink or stretch. That's the basic 1 over x. But then it does say minus 1 right here. Okay, minus 1, remember, it's opposite, so I would say this moved right 1. So for number 16, you just write right 1. That's it. You don't actually have to graph it. You just have to tell me where it moves, okay? It'll save you some graphing time. Okay, so you just look at the parts, and these rules apply. Now, on 19 through 27, I'm only having you do evens in that section, and you do have to graph it. You can make a table of values to graph it. Remember, to find the middle of your table, you find out what number makes the bottom of the fraction 0. So let's look at number 20. What number could I plug in for x and make the bottom part 0? 6, right? Because 6 minus 6 is 0. So the middle of your table of values should be a 6, and you can go either direction from there. Okay? So you only have to graph those. Those ones, notice the directions don't say to tell me what it did. You don't have to say up, down, left, right, stretch, shrink, or anything. You just have to graph it. Okay? So on 3 through 17, you're only telling me how it moved, shrink or stretch, reflection if it's a negative, up or down, left and right. That's all you're just writing words to tell me what it did. You're not graphing till 20 through 26, but you don't have to give me any words. You just have to graph on those ones, okay? So that's all of the examples I'm going over because it's plenty of information for you, and that will cover everything you need for the problems that you're doing. So we're going to end with that today. Call me if you have any questions, and watch this video again if you need to. Just one more quick review. If my number, absolute value of my number is bigger than 1, okay, and I want to show you where this is, okay, because it's on page 775 example 1. It says it right there, okay? If that absolute value number is bigger than 1, it's a stretch. If it's less than 1, it's a shrink. If it's negative, it's a reflection, okay? And then the second part is on 777. It talks about it in the key concept and also on example 4. Remember, this number here means we move our graph left or right, but it's opposite. So if it's positive, it's left. If it's negative, it's right, because it's opposite. Okay, don't forget this part right here. Okay, and then this number hanging out the end is up or down, and it's regular. If it's positive, it's up. If it's negative, it's down. Okay, and to find out where the middle of your table of values is, whatever makes this bottom part of your fraction 0, that's what I want to put in the middle. Okay, all right, you guys, we'll talk to you later, and good luck. Okay, bye-bye.